Hey everybody, it's Wednesday. We're not going to let a pandemic stop us. We wanted to talk about something that was requested by one of our viewers. I am Jared Kubika Miller. I'm a debate coach and professor of communications. This is Matt Shapiro, law graduate, JD. All right. And so the topic that we've been sort of requested was about persuasive and narrative in debate, the role of that. Okay. and um, and so just a little bit of background about debate. If you haven't ever done debate before, there's a bunch of different types, and some of them, a lot of them, are research based, and people are able to compile volumes of evidence, and they want to jam as much evidence into their 6 to 8 minute speech as possible, because the more arguments they make, the harder it is for their opponents to respond to all of them. And if they don't respond to all of them, then that means you can claim to be winning them. And so that means that people just start talking faster and faster and faster. And sometimes when people hear that, it the people are like, is this really what you're doing? And so a little bit of resistance to that is a persuasive or narrative approach to this, where you are telling stories. And so the stories are what sway the judge one way or the other and determine the ballot. All right, so that's my background. Okay, Matt, what's your background with narrative in debate?
So narrative and debate can be used different ways. And I think, off the top of my head, I've had experiences where I felt like they can be used very effectively, and where it can be maybe a little bit ineffective, or it doesn't, really persuade somebody. And I think the best example I can give is, as you were just saying, in debate, we do a lot of research, and we learn a lot of, facts about a situation. And a good narrative, in my opinion, does a good job of explaining some of the very human elements of some of these stories. They can go to link stories and things like that, where I've also seen, and this is my, I guess, opinion or preference, but I've seen people use personal experience, even like from familial things, like, oh, well, my grandfather was this and that. And they may be very emotionally compelling stories, and they may have effects on different judges more than, say, me if I was judging around. But I do find that, like, they can be very artfully used when articulating some of these, topical events or things that are happening. But in my personal opinion, I don't necessarily give as much credence to a personal story or personal narrative.
Yeah, I mean, when I was going to school at Long Beach, they were doing a project where they were using a lot more narrative, and they would incorporate rap into their speeches. They would actually like play music. In fact, like the 2018, no, the 2017 CETA finals, they did the same. They did that. All right, the affirmative was like reading poetry with music running in the background. It was Rutgers. And it was pretty amazing. You know what I mean? Like you're seeing somebody like actual do a performance as their affirmative, making arguments, making claims, and things like that.
Yeah.
And so like that was always something that we never really did. I don't think that narrative has become necessarily the most popular approach, but I definitely think it's much more accepted than when I was debating. That, like, you're like, oh, you're doing performance for your affirmative. Okay, you're doing a performative act. That's cool, and so it's definitely more accepted, but I wouldn't say that it's like taken over or anything like that.
I think, like, in my personal, these are all opinions, and these are my opinions, yeah. So I'm going to tell you my opinions. But, I think of, like, in some of the comm theory I've learned, we'd learn about, like, logos, pathos, and ethos, right? And, like, I kind of think of so much of debate in, like, a logos context, where you're talking about pure stringing together sentences of information that, when strung that way, make some logical point or sense. And that completely ignores, any aspect of a debate performance where you're talking or using your, ethos or pathos. You're connecting with your audience. You're using emotion to show kind of you care about these arguments beyond just the mere like structured sentences and formatted, approach to unlaying the information. Every effective good debater or politician or whatever we're talking about, lawyer, they have a very good way to know the audience and kind of judge just how much performance or like emotion they need to put into an argument, and weigh that against the pure verbiage, the sentences and arguments you're stringing together. Like that's an art. To put these together in my mind is an art, and they're not opposite of each other. They're used together at all times. And I think, I've been in debates where it's felt very dry, for instance, where like just because you read off of a piece of paper, it doesn't. I don't feel I don't feel, and that's important because as human beings, a judge is a human being, and there's some element of performance, and that does get incorporated.
You see, that's kind of where a lot of the advocates are coming from. So, I mean, you were talking about calm theory a little bit. Now, on the rhetoric end, Walter Fisher is huge. He wrote the narrative paradigm, and so like the way that you are supposed to evaluate narratives, the most boiled down and rudimentary way is through fidelity and probability. Okay, so fidelity is how the story rings true. So you're trying to like, oh, that's something I can identify with, or it's something that touches me. And then probability is like, how likely is this story representative of things? And so what you're talking about is and so probability is already something that we've been harping on, needs to be a heavier sort of thing in debate. But the fidelity is a really interesting one. Like, how do you judge that? You know what I mean? It's like, and is it different? Is it different than, well, I just wasn't buying your advantage?
It kind of reminds me of what you were talking about when we were talking about judging a few weeks ago. And you said, like, I try not to think of it as what I like. I try to think of it as what people would like. And it kind of reminds me, of just objective versus subjective, evaluation, or like you're kind of saying like, forgive me, but like one of them is subjective. Like, do I believe it? Can I personally understand this? And the other half probability is like, would people agree? And
kind of fidelity is just like how genuine is the story? You know what I mean? It's like if you're going to compare that, it'd be like, how accurate is the research, right? And like, the analogy. And so, but when you only have this one story and then you're focusing on one person, like what is, how do you put that into an evaluation? How does that become part of the judging process? And like, do you think it encourages like judge intervention? That's one of the big criticisms.
How would that provoke, or how would that encourage judge intervention to that extent?
Well, because when the stories become really personal, then is the judge now have to make it personal, right? It's like, is there certain secret information about the judge and their personal life that you're now kind of tapping into? Is that the best way to judge a debate, right? Like, so that's the question. There's this guy named Robert Gass wrote a whole article on
Bob Gass was my professor at Cal State Fullerton.
Oh, really? All right.
Yes, he was.
Well, he wrote it in like '88, man. Like, was he an old dude?
He was he was an older gentleman. Yeah. He was a very funny guy. Bob Gass, I remember specifically, he was huge into Halloween. Like, he would get all decked out, and every year it was basically like at the comm department, it was like, what Bob Gass doing for Halloween this year? But Professor Gass, your class was a pleasure, and I recommend it to anyone who's at Cal State Fullerton.
But so yeah, Bob Gass totally wrote about how we should be teaching people to be experts in debate, and he was directly critiquing the narrative paradigm. So he was answering it back, and one of the things was about like how judges view this stuff and how do you do it without intervention. Now that was back in '88, and so there's been a lot of rounds since then. Been a lot of stuff that's happened. I mean, hell, I'd be really interested to know what he thinks now. about that.
I mean, the part that threw me for that, the part that threw me for a bit of a loop was like, I mean, in my opinion, it's almost unthinkable to think that like a judge would intervene. Like I would understand if if the opposing team kind of critiqued their whole point by saying a personal, a personal account, a personal narrative is like has no room in this debate. But I couldn't imagine like a judge. We always talk about how there are no rules. Like for a judge to actually be like, you must stop. I will not acknowledge these arguments. I don't know what the
intervention. They were talking a little bit more about like at the end of the debate when you're rendering a verdict, you're kind of like, yeah, well, you know what I mean? It's like whether or not that's the best way to teach debate. It's not that you can't do it. It's like they're arguing about which way's better. You know what I mean? And so and he puts together some pretty good, arguments about why he doesn't do that. And so yeah, I would love to. That'd be awesome. We should. Ask him.
I should. I haven't seen him in a while, and I don't think well, for the next foreseeable future, I won't see him. But I hope to see him again soon.
Yeah. And maybe someone watching knows him. Like, let's get in contact with him. I'd love to do a follow up on that.
I'm really intrigued by this week's topic because it's one of these things where like I've always had these deep opinions on like there is this middle ground where like how much time and effort do you dedicate to kind of the performance aspect. Like I had a kid at Cal State Fullerton that I was he wasn't on my team like my partner, but we were both competing in public forum together, and he came from an intern background, and he actually was an actor like as a child or something along those lines. And I mean the line that I remember, I don't know if I came up with it or not, but I just used to say like that guy could read. I could give my first affirmative and he can get up and read off the back of a Cracker Jack box and like people would believe, just like vote for him. Like he just had this way about him that it almost seemed like it didn't matter what he said. Like you just wanted to like this guy. You wanted to trust this guy. You wanted to vote for this guy. And it's powerful when you see those in debate rounds because so many of us, I always kind of found myself to be very argument driven. And like, I tend to, I always feel like I try to care. I do care when I'm in the round, but I typically focus on the words more than like how I'm supposed to deliver them. But whenever I hit certain people, I just am reminded constantly that like what can persuade someone is not just what you think, what I am. Like it's always good to be kind of malleable and keep your eyes open to things you like.
Okay, so Katie McCaffrey, the one who proposed this this subject, said that she ran into a IPDA round last month, and the affirmative did this and didn't know the negative didn't know how to respond to it, and wondering like exactly how to do it. I've seen these go really wrong before, these performance things. Novice rounds, I forget, and somebody was doing like this sort of like silence critique where they kind of gave their thesis and then just sat for like 7 minutes, and the negative was like really confused, and the negative also did that, but they don't know why they're doing it.
No.
I understand where Katie's coming from right now, where the
conformist.
Yeah. But in all fairness, they get confused by a lot of stuff. This is just one of the many things. You know what I mean? They're kind of like, what the heck is this counterplan thing that they're running? I don't know what to do. Permutation? What are you talking about? Like that happens a lot. So, yeah. But I sympathize with what Katie was talking about. Okay, and so I think so. The article written by Kelly McDonald and Jeff Jarman is a good one to read on this. Okay, because not only does it give you kind of an overview of this whole thing, and it's available for free on online, and so you just look up Kelly McDonald, Jeffrey Jarman, getting the story right, the role of narrative in academic debate, and that would be a good one. In fact, you know what? I'm just going to put that in the comments right now for anyone watching. There you go. Check that out. That there's really good stuff written in there, and if anything, that it kind of points you in a good direction. And so, in the end, the article says that that they propose this middle ground where you still have like certain structure and stuff like that, but that you should expand what your opinion of evidence is. and that includes really good stories. You know what I mean? Like elaborate stories that take minutes to tell. You know what I mean? Not just like little blips. And so I think you kind of naturally come down on that. You know what I mean? It's like, oh yeah, that's great. The artistry that you can insert into that is excellent. So
that middle path is exactly kind of how I feel. Like you're just kind of constantly trying to like, you know, tailor your debate, your performance to kind of like recognize weaknesses, recognize strengths, and constantly kind of adjust, you know, to like not have any weaknesses if you can, you know what I mean? And if you're overdoing, you know, speed is a good thing that comes to mind. You know, I've heard, I have, when I'm doing lots of tournaments, you know, I'm very comfortable with people going fast, and like even the difference between spreaders can be different, like, and I mean inflection, and like, you know, they know when to slow down, even, you know, how they do, and like just make it loud, like this is what I need to say, and like those are little things that like they're not exactly what we're talking about as going full blown into like a narrative. I just mean to say that like that part of debate where you're kind of like, look, like there is like an emotion that needs to be captured, that needs to get this judge to understand, like those are little parts of like even technical. Yeah, go ahead.
I think it can be done well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think right now is that like not enough people really practice it. Not enough people know how to coach it, and it probably just gets executed. Really
There's a feeling too, like in a lot of teams. I mean, I'm not speaking for every team, but a lot of teams, you know, everything's kind of like segregated is the word. You know, the IEers are over here, and the debaters are over here, and the platformers are over here, and the interpreters are over here. Like, and there's not a lot of, yeah, people get very set in their ways. Like if I have been debating for 5-6 years, I've been doing it since high school, and like it's just hard to break certain habits. And like it's kind of, if you believe subjectively like you're doing it the right way, then you have no reason to change. And like that's where kind of keeping an open mind and audience analysis, like whether you're believing yourself is to be right should be predicated on how successful you've been with it, right? Like if you've been winning every debate, then yeah, keep doing what you're doing. If you're not, then there's room for improvement, and this is one of those areas.
Yeah, okay. So there's another comment on this from a viewer right now, but it doesn't tell me who it's from. It just says DebateSensei. So sorry, but where it says that a lot of these narratives come from personal experience, right? Mm-hmm. And then it creates sort of deep investment in their position, and the debater can't afford to lose that argument. And so now, what happens when you have to? Oh, that was Tim. Okay, like you have to vote for or against somebody and it's their personal narrative. You know what I mean? Like you do that.
I have a good example of this. Okay, and at a NAT tournament in Muncie, Indiana, Ball State, we went up against a team from Pennsylvania. I think they were from maybe even Philadelphia, and it was at that time fracking, which still is a big, huge deal. That was the crux of the whole tournament for a public forum tournament. And this team in their first, you know, their speech came up and gave this long account as to why we should not stop fracking, and then literally said because his grandfather makes his only money from a well that they basically drilled in the back of his house, and how like if you were to end fracking, he would have no means to survive, basically. And I mean, I got to be careful when I say this. It was one of those moments where I got to come up as the member and say like, well, that's really sad. You know what I mean? And I don't want to like hurt this person's grandfather, but like they are biased because like they are telling us why, beyond all the reasons we laid out as to why we should stop it, simply because his grandfather, a singular person, like they do represent a class, but we're saying that like, anyways, I'm not trying to get into that whole debate. My point is just like, we won that round, and like I should, and when 4 or 5 minutes of a 9 to 10 minute speech is dedicated about your grandfather, you know, you're gambling that the judge is going to care about your grandfather as much as you. And I'm not saying that they don't care about your grandfather, but in a debate space, we're really kind of supposed to be global. We're supposed to be broad. We're making policy decisions for the whole country or the whole world or whatever it is.
but the thing that, like, okay, so one of the things that Tim was asking about was, like, people are so invested, it's like you can't afford to lose it. It's like, I'll be honest, it sounds like most debaters make those arguments even if they're not deep personal.
Mm-hmm.
Like we can't afford not to, deal with the refugee crisis. We can't afford not to, end global warming. Like there's like that deep level of investment is everywhere you look. So it seems really not unique. I put a couple of really good videos that I think illustrate what I consider to be really good sort of performance or narrative approaches, especially the 2013 NDT finals with Emporia. Wow, that was a mind blower, man. And like people watching this should check that out. But there is still a lot of fast talking because the opposing team just goes head on, man. They just go head on. They're like, all right, here we go. We're gonna spread this one. And so it was debate about debate, kind of like what we're doing here. You know what I mean? It's like, how are we supposed to do this activity?
And that brings us back to that point you were making, and I slipped my mind for a minute, but I wanted to talk about it. Like you kind of mentioned, like, what does someone do, especially like a new debater, a novice debater? What do you do when someone comes up and does something completely out of the blue? You did not expect it, right? So we've talked about this before, and like,
yeah, if I had it to do all over again, I would trust my preparation. You know what I mean? It's kind of like if you're confused, the judge is probably confused, right? It's like, at least there's a really good chance because you're doing this activity, you're smart. So especially Katie, like if you're still watching, like trust your prep time. Go up there and you're still like, you might as well go with what you prepared, what you put the most time into, right? And even if you lose, then at least you did the best thing rather than change your mind at the very end and try to do something different. That's actually like my final round at NPCE was like that. We decided to switch up at the last minute. Bad idea. Bad idea. We were like, oh my God, we prepared something for this. It's a little different situation. But the point is that we switched it up at the end. If you get thrown for something, you get like, they're trying to suck you into that. They're trying to suck you into like, I got to switch up right now. Like, don't do that, right? You probably have like way more material on what you prepared. And I would like 9 times out of 10 go with what you prepared.
I was gonna say very much the same thing. Like don't you have to do a couple of things, and we've talked about them on this already. Like, listen to the other team. Even in the narrative, listen to them and try to take a few sound bites that you can disagree with, whether they have anything to do with your case or not. But at least it shows that, like, I am listening, and I am like, not only listening, I'm listening with a fine-tooth comb to everything you're saying, right? And if they really do spend their entire speech, let's just say for an extreme example, on some narrative, like, in my opinion, if I've prepared something on the negative side, I would be determined to deliver all of it. I mean, and you got to make some decisions because you got to.
Example that I showed, the 2013 NCT finals, like one of the thing is that the topic is about domestic energy, and they still make a connection with the topic, even though they're doing this like very personal sort of critique of debate, right? It's very identity focused, but the even though the topic is domestic energy, like I think they did a incredibly good job on connecting that to that, you know what I mean? The topic to themselves. And it actually, I don't know, I think it made a whole lot of sense. You can still evaluate narratives in terms of topicality and in terms of probability already, but like, I think you can accept it. You can still kind of go, just because it was a personal story doesn't mean that it was the best story for this topic. Like you still have role in the top.
You have to assess everything, right? Like we're talking about like pre you got to look at everything you're going to tell yourself I'm going to bring into this debate round. You got to look as objectively as you can. We're supposed to be very good at looking at things from both sides. So like when you are assessing a story that you want to bring in, a personal story or however, like whatever, like these kind of they're kind of, a big decision. Like you're going to make this choice. You got to really weigh that against what people will think. And if you have giant gaping holes that you need to account for, like you got to make sure you cover that in the 5 minutes you're going to talk about one of these things. I like how you brought up how a team did the same thing as the other team and sat down, or you know what I mean? And I think that brings up a point where it's like, you know, don't feel pressure. Like, this is, if you've never seen it before, don't assume that like this is winning. Like, yes, you were frightened for a second because you don't know what the heck to do, but like,
yeah, you start doing what your opponent does, that shows like, oh my God, they're winning.
yeah,
right?
they agree always.
I think they're winning, so I'm going to be like them. And it's like you gotta stick to your guns, right? Be yourself and create distinction in order to make that forced choice.
There's a lot of neg strategy in this world, as me and Jared have discussed at length and time. And it reminds me of like, if someone runs a long narrative in their affirmative, maybe you run a topicality, and maybe that allows you to kind of discuss their point of like, I don't think this should even, you get to raise the point where like, this is irrelevant, or like try to spin it that way somehow, and then get to your stuff. Like, and the allocation of time, you should listen. And if they spent 7 minutes on something, you should spend, some amount of time, a minute at least, acknowledging that. But like, maybe
I think we're offering a solution to this, though. I think that like the asynchronous tournament that we're putting together, because all the national tournaments are done, like I really want to see how competitors approach that. Right now it's only individual events, but if we have any interest in people that want to put together an asynchronous debate tournament in which you kind of like you get to spend some time in between speeches. You got to think of it like chess, like remote chess, right? You make a move, somebody, they make a move, send it back. But with debate, we could do that, and over like 5 to 9 weeks, we could have 6 rounds of any type of debate that you want. And I think that having the extra time to watch somebody's video over and over again, check their stuff, I think that would increase the artistry of debate. I think that we'd see, like people wouldn't feel a need to like blisteringly fast and do stuff like that.
And if nothing else, I'm hoping it really increases clash. I mean, when you really have that much time to kind of listen and focus your research and your arguments, like it should increase the amount of time that like each, there should be less filler, like you're going to have a lot more time to kind of develop your point, specifically attacking and bolstering your arguments, so there's really, I mean, I'm very excited. I mean, we've seen it in classes already, and we're excited about this tournament doing the same thing.
Yeah, we got another question. This one's Katie again, asking if we can lay out a format. I mentioned a couple weeks ago about starting with an attention getter. I always thought that starting with, like you don't start with thank yous. You don't start off with a topic. All right. The first thing that you say is, just something shocking and startling. Okay. And so, I mean, if we're talking about, I don't know, the FA topic is about energy production or something like that, and you say that, like you have statistics about how many people are going to die on low-lying islands, right? Just give a population, it's like 200,000 people, 1 million people, 6 million people are at risk of dying in the next 10 years if we don't do something now. You know what? I'm really happy to be talking about this topic. And then you jump into, here's the topic. First off, resolutional analysis. I'm going to talk to you about the definitions and the plan that I'm proposing and the criteria. And then you just do advantages. I think that's a great way of going about it. But I think that, maybe we should talk about the syllogism. You think that's one that?
I believe. I mean, hopefully she'll try to fire back if she doesn't agree. I was going to say another way I used to do it, for instance, though a little bit different than yours, is like I would come up. I always thought of the resolutional analysis as almost like the intro for an interp, and I would kind of try to just get through that, and then have this moment where I kind of get to like a theme, and I'm like, okay, this is what's going down, and then go through, get to plan, go through inherency and harms inherency, get to plan, and then start with your advantages. But at that change where you shift from a resolutional analysis, that is where that moment where I kind of be like, okay, and I do exactly what you said, where you kind of shock them or just get their attention to be like, this is what's going on in the world.
Okay, well, you know what? Like, I'll definitely answer that the next time that we're around. Hey, Katie, if you're talking about the syllogism, then I could handle that on the next one. But you know what? We've been at it for 30 minutes. I think we had a really good discussion. Check out those links, everybody, that I put in the comments section. That takes you to some good examples of stuff that pops to mind when I think of it. It gets a little hard to follow at times, but there's also an article in there that you can read. Okay, so I'm here with Matt Shapiro, JD. I'm Jared Kubika Miller, debate coach, and we will see you next week. Okay, hey everyone, stay safe.